in addition to creating examples of spectra of perfection of uniqueness, activity, and intelligence, God also created a spectrum of perfection of will in organisms. And will would be those things that are examples of animals making choices, animals making decisions, and perhaps examples of organisms that are unpredictable in their behavior. Examples of where animals are choosing, are making choices. First of all, real easy examples and common examples would be those instances where organisms are choosing things that really are an advantage to the organism. For example, animals that would choose the food that's easiest to eat. There would be, for example, honeybees that would choose to go to the flowers that are the easiest to get nectar out of. For example, they don't go to the alfalfa flowers that wallop them when they land on those flowers. Or they tend to choose a particular type of plant over another plant merely because it produces more nectar. So it means they have to visit fewer plants in order to get the necessary nectar. And there are also examples of birds that eat particular size seeds because their bills are just the right size to eat those seeds. Seeds that are too small or too large are more difficult to eat, so the birds tend to select seeds of a particular size range. There are examples of organisms that choose particular mates over other mates. And in many of those cases, the choices are of individuals in the species that would actually be better choices. For example, female fiddler crabs tend to choose male fiddler crabs that have very much larger claws. And that in turn is actually an advantage to a fiddler crab. It's more likely that a fiddler crab with large claws will in fact survive and produce many offspring than a fiddler crab with small claws. So when a female chooses a fiddler crab with large claws to mate with, she's going to tend to have offspring that survive better. So it is to her benefit in passing her genetic information on to choose mates of that nature. It's also some organisms choose in escaping when they see a predator coming or something that scares them. They will take the shortest route to safety as opposed to the one that goes back home again. Now, there's some organisms that don't do that. I think the squirrels in my particular neighborhood have a completely different theory on how to get back to, or how to get out of danger, like the road. They sit there in the road and try to make a decision. Should I go this way? Should I go this way? And I'm sitting there, how do I avoid hitting the little guy? At the last minute, he decides to go one direction versus another, and sometimes they get hit in that process. But some organisms consistently run to not their favorite tree or not their home tree, but actually to the tree that is closest to them, which actually is to their advantage. On the other hand, there are examples of organisms that make choices that don't seem to give a particular advantage to the organism. Those are a little bit harder to understand other than it's just a choice of the organism. For example, there are organisms with food preferences. Perhaps you've experienced this with your own pets. A particular pet will like this kind of, particular cat will like this kind of pet food, but not this kind, not this brand. This particular dog likes this brand of dog food, but not this brand of dog food. Doesn't seem to be any good reason for preferring one to the other. It's just that a different dog has a different preference. Simple matter of choice. In other cases, we've got organisms that choose their mates in what appear to be somewhat random for what seems to be random reasons. Bowerbirds choose their mates by the arrangement. What happens is a male bowerbird creates a little, I don't know what you call it, kind of a bower. It's actually called a bower. kind of a home place for the nest to be. And he arranges it with all sorts of pretty things. He likes the color blue, so there's often little blue things around there. And the female comes along and just chooses the nest that she finds most attractive. Researchers have never been able to figure out what kind of preference she's typically following, nor any advantage to choosing that one as opposed to any other. It seems that she just makes a choice on the basis of what she thinks is prettier, I guess. That would be an example of just a neutrally advantageous choice, one that really doesn't seem to give any advantage either way. It indicates that the organism is making a choice just out of their personal interests. The most interesting examples of organisms making choices are those that choose behavior that overrides instinctive behavior or conditioned behavior. So an organism might have learned a particular behavior, or they seem to be programmed with a particular behavior, but they learn, or at some point they choose to override that and behave in a different manner. Great examples of this are the cases when animals kept by human beings get injured, and the animals will behave under those circumstances in a radically different manner. An example came in my own life when my own dog, Alexander the Great, was a German Shepherd, got into a fight with another dog, much bigger dog. Alex, short for Alexander the Great, Alex did not come out of the fight well. At some point in the midst of the fight, there was this horrible sound of an organism that has been seriously hurt, and Alex diverged from the fight, wandered a few steps over, and just collapsed on his side. And as he did so, I ran over to him, and he had this incredible gash in his neck. It was about 13 inches long. At its deepest point, it was about 1.5 to 2 inches deep, and it was caused by the fangs of the larger dog as it slashed his neck. I was amazed that you could cut that deeply into the neck of a dog and not hit something like a major vein or something. But it was sitting there just wide open, and you could tell that my dog was in very serious pain, and anything you did to him, like try to pick him up or anything like that, it would cause even more pain. And you could see the lip kind of lift up on his, whenever he felt more pain, you could see him cringe. And if someone caused that pain, you could just see the German Shepherd in him wanting to bite that person because they just hurt him. But he overrode the natural instinct of biting the individual that's causing him pain, because he seemed to understand that we were doing our best to help him. We picked him up in all that pain, put him in the truck, and carried him off drove him off to the veterinarian. Normally, he would have nothing to do with a veterinarian. The veterinarian would shoot him from a distance with a with a tranquilizer gun, because he was vicious in the presence of a veterinarian. But in that particular instance, he allowed us to take him into the veterinarian. He allowed the veterinarian to work on him and to stitch him up without killing the veterinarian. He clearly understood, or at least that's how I interpret it. That's the only way I think even to this day, that I can interpret it. He understood that he was being helped. So he overrode his instinctive drive to hurt something that was hurting him, and laid there and allowed us to help him. Examples of this among pets and among horses and things like this abound, where organisms choose to override what would be sort of a normal response. So organisms, at least some animals, have choice. They seem to be able to make choices. And some organisms seem to be able to make significant choices, overriding instinct. Another example of will In the Bible, there seems to be some evidence that animals, or at least some animals, can be guilty of doing wrong. I guess it's another way to put it, the fancy way to put it is that they're morally culpable for their behavior. For example, the serpent in the Garden of Eden was used by Satan, or so it seems, to deceive Eve. When God comes along to talk to Adam and ultimately to address first the serpent and then Eve and then Adam, he confronts the serpent and condemns the serpent. Now we understand the condemnation of Eve and the condemnation of Adam was because they chose to do what was wrong. They were morally culpable. What about the serpent, though? Was the serpent morally culpable? It would seem that in a similar way that God condemned Adam and Eve for disobeying God, God also condemned the serpent, as if the serpent had made some sort of a choice to do what was wrong. There's a hint there that at least the serpent was cursed individually. Not all serpents, not all his descendants were in fact cursed, but just that particular serpent. We also see in Genesis chapter 9 that God says, whenever a human kills another human, that human is to be killed. And we can understand that. Humans are created in the image of God. If a human chooses to kill another human, that human has committed a great sin against not just the person they killed, but in fact God himself, because we are created in the image of God. But it also says any organism, any animal or human that kills another animal, another human should be killed. If an animal kills a human being, that animal is to be killed. In a similar fashion as a human killing a human is to be killed, an animal is to be killed who kills a human. As if the animal knows that it isn't right to kill a human, and if they do kill a human, they should be killed consequently. There seems to be evidence that, in fact, animals might be morally culpable for doing what is wrong. A third example are among the Amalekites, where God says to Saul, the king, that he is to kill all the Amalekites. But not just all the Amalekites, not just all the men, women, and children of the Amalekites, but he's to kill their animals also. Very explicitly, as if the sin of the Amalekites was not just something that the Amalekites were guilty of, but somehow the animals of the Amalekites had become guilty of something as well. So there are a few hints in the Bible that animals might actually be morally culpable of doing what is wrong and deserve to be punished for it. Then when we look in the world of animals and watch their behavior, we find that there's some interesting behaviors of animals that include what you might call deception, what you might call examples where animals are deceiving other animals into believing something is true when it isn't. I've already given you an example or two of this sort of thing. I've given you the example of the raven who learned to play dead and deceive other ravens into thinking that the food that he's beside is in fact poisonous. That's a form of deception. Is that something that an animal is guilty of? Is an animal who deceives like that doing something that is wrong? Interesting kind of question. Mantis shrimp at various stages of their life, as they grow, their skeleton, which is on the outside of their body, gets too small, and so they have to break open that skeleton, shed it, and then grow another one in its place. Before that new skeleton has hardened, the mantis shrimp is very susceptible to being hurt or eaten. He's got a soft skin. And during that period of time, this shrimp will take on a very different personality, will act very aggressively, and thus scare off organisms that would in fact be otherwise a danger to him, deceiving other organisms into believing that he is a dangerous little feller rather than being vulnerable at that particular instance. I also like the examples of the birds like the plovers who actually lay their eggs directly on the ground. I mean, their nest is right there. It's not hidden. Of course, the nest looks very much, and the eggs look, and in fact, the plover that's sitting on it looks very much like the ground, so much so that you can walk right across it and not realize that that's a bird on a nest. But if, in fact, you get too close to such a nest, the female plover bird will jump off the nest and try to lead you away from the nest so that you don't eat their eggs. And the female plover bird will drag its wing along as if it has been injured in the process, giving you the impression that maybe you can catch him or her and kill and eat that one. So you're diverted from the eggs by this female plover who is deceiving you into thinking she is injured when she is not. Perhaps one of the most fascinating examples, maybe even the one that should get the Oscar or whatever in this particular category, is the hognose snake. When the hognose snake is threatened, it will go through a very impressive death throw ceremony. It starts writhing, it starts bleeding, it starts vomiting, and it thrashes about, and I mean, it goes through this Oscar-winning dying performance to convince whatever's after them that they're about to die, and apparently to dissuade them from eating them. These are interesting examples. There are many more of organisms that are deceiving other organisms into believing things that aren't true. Are those instances of animals actually deceiving? Are they guilty of deceiving? Interesting question. We have other examples of organisms that deceive other organisms not to protect themselves, but to get something. An example here would be birds that learn how to give or simulate a distress call of the species in order to have all the birds disappear. So, for example, you have a species of bird that has a particular distress call. Every bird in the species knows that distress call, and whenever there's a predator in the area, maybe a hawk flying over, or maybe it's a particular snake that's going after the nest of the birds know to make that alarm call, and then all the birds of the species will disappear, fly away, or find places to hide to protect themselves. But along comes a bird of the species that realizes, here's some food there. If I give the alarm call that there is something about to endanger us, then all the other birds will disappear and I'll be able to eat that all by myself. There are individuals who from time to time figure out how to do this. This isn't true of all the birds in a given species, otherwise the alarm call wouldn't work at all. It happens to be true only of individuals, as if there are individual birds that learn how to be deceptive in order to get food. Individual sinners, if you wish. There's an example of an orangutan in a zoo who would come along and sit down next to a zookeeper when the zookeeper was in the cage, and continue as they're sitting next to each other to sort of get closer and closer to the zookeeper or to another orangutan, in order to reach around at some point when they're close enough, the zookeeper to grab a backpack and run with it. So deceiving the zookeeper or another orangutan into believing that they're not doing anything, and then all of a sudden to run off with what they desired in the first place. Again, it seems to be that we have examples of organisms that are deceiving other organisms on purpose in order to gain something. Are these examples of organisms that are doing wrong and know about it? Interesting question again. Another example of this sort of thing are the animals that do certain behaviors only after checking around first to make sure no one else is watching or looking. For example, there's a rooster that after checking that other roosters are absent, lures a female in with a food call. This might be a hen that's actually interested in other roosters, but here's a rooster that makes sure no other competitor is around before he attracts a particular female. There's examples in monkey troops. Monkeys often have a hierarchical structure where one monkey is sort of the boss. He's an alpha male in that particular troop. And there are other monkeys that are not the most important monkeys. They don't have the first choice on a mate, for example. They don't have the first choice on the food. And sometimes the monkeys that aren't the alpha monkey take an interest or get an interest in the alpha male's choice for a mate, the female that's actually mated with the alpha male. And the monkeys that are trying to get to her will wait for an opportunity when the alpha male can't see them to approach the alpha male's female. So he will literally look around, make sure that the alpha male can't see him before he engages in his behavior. It seems that this would be an example of an animal that knows, at least it seems that way, that he knows that he shouldn't be doing this. He's making sure that he can get away with it before he actually proceeds to do so. There's even examples in the animal world of tattletalers. The best example I know of here is a male chimp by the name of Dandy, who was one of those chimps that wasn't the alpha male but interested in the alpha female, the alpha male's choice, but witnessed another chimp making advances on the alpha female. And since Dandy was jealous of that one, Dandy went around and tattletaled to the alpha male, bringing the alpha male around, so the alpha male discovered his friend going after his mate, and thus getting rid of that guy. So it seems to be an example of an animal tattletaling on another animal. There's even, interestingly enough, examples that we can only understand to be chastisement, where animals actually chastise other animals. They discipline animals of their own kind. The classic example here is the elephant Hanako, who, after refusing to nurse her own calf at its birth, two of the other female elephants in the same herd came to her, and here's the quote, picked Hanako up with their tusks, bounced her up against a wall. They did it 2 or 3 times until Hanako finally allowed her calf to nurse. So here we have an example of 2 female elephants chastising or disciplining another female elephant until she behaved in a proper manner. And finally, we have perhaps examples of organisms that intentionally disobey. Perhaps in your experience, you have a dog or a cat or something like that. Well, it's better to dogs. Cats never do what you want them to do. But dogs seem to know, or at least learn in the course of time, what the proper behavior is and what the improper behavior is. And when a dog does something that it knows is improper behavior, they sure act like they are guilty. They go around kind of sneaking with their head down, that sort of thing, and they seem to be aware of the fact that they've done wrong. And if they're they're thinking of doing something wrong, they make actions, make it clear that they intentionally are doing something wrong, even though they know it to be wrong. There seems to be some evidence that at least some animals can understand what they should do and shouldn't do and realize that the things they shouldn't do, they really shouldn't do. What we have then is a spectrum of perfection of will in organisms, all the way from organisms that don't seem to make any choice whatsoever, to organisms that make choices that just bring advantage to them, to organisms that have preferences and make choices even though it doesn't seem to have any advantage either way, all the way through to animals that even seem to make choices to do what is wrong. Again, overriding perhaps an instinct of what is right and what is wrong, and insist on doing something in spite of that or different from that. These would be examples of organisms that can make their own choices. Just like persons can make choices, these animals have the ability to choose. God has placed a spectrum of perfection of choice, of will, in organisms to give us the picture of God as a God of will. And the spectrum of perfection is supposed to lift our brains to think or to infer the existence of a being that's able to make choices and able to make them freely and can make infinite choices like our God. There's evidence here in the will found in animals that they are created by a God who has will, a characteristic of personhood.